Joking about making Canada the 51st state and threatening comprehensive tariffs, something unprecedented started happening in Florida's real estate market. Canadians who have owned property in the Sunshine State for decades began selling their homes en masse, and the numbers tell a story that Florida's tourism industry desperately doesn't want you to know. Federal Reserve Bank data shows that just 1 month after Trump escalated trade tensions with Canada in early 2025, Palm Beach County home listings spiked to the highest level they've been in 10 years. Not a gradual increase, not a seasonal fluctuation, a spike, the kind of sudden surge that happens when an entire demographic makes a collective decision to get out. According to public records, 321 Palm Beach County homes with Canadian mailing addresses sold in 2025. Boynton Beach, West Palm Beach, and Boca Raton led the exodus. These aren't distressed sales or foreclosures. These are Canadians who built lives in Florida, who spent winters there for 20, 30 years, who are now walking away because they no longer feel welcome in a country whose president openly mocks their sovereignty. And this is just Palm Beach County. The trend extends across the entire Florida coast from Miami to Fort Lauderdale to the Gulf. Real estate agents who have worked Florida's luxury markets for decades say they've never seen anything like this. One broker told local media she had 0 Canadian buyers this year, 0 after 12 years of consistent Canadian clientele. The market just disappeared overnight. Here's what makes this economic crisis particularly devastating for Florida. Canadians aren't just tourists who visit for a week and leave. They are Florida's largest international real estate buyers, accounting for 17% of all foreign home purchases and spending well over $1 billion annually. They buy property, they pay property taxes, they invest in local businesses, they anchor entire communities economically. The Atlantic Hotel and Spa in Fort Lauderdale calls itself a Canadian hotel because of how dependent their business model has been on Canadian visitors and property owners. As of July 2025, their Canadian bookings were down 32% compared to the previous year. By December, the manager was publicly begging Canadians to return. "We have desperately seen a decline," she told reporters. "We are begging and welcoming and hoping that the Canadians come back." But they're not coming back. And the reason they're staying away has nothing to do with economics and everything to do with respect. Survey data from Fort Lauderdale hotels reveals exactly why Canadians are abandoning Florida. 50% of Canadian guests who stopped coming cited the economic environment that took effect in January 2025. But when you dig deeper into what they're actually saying, it's not about money, it's about dignity. They're saying since the changes around January that in the economic environment they don't feel welcome here in Florida or the United States, one hotel manager explained. Think about what that means. These are people who have spent decades building relationships in Florida communities, who know their favorite restaurants by name, who have friends, routines, and emotional connections to specific neighborhoods. And they're walking away from all of it because the President of the United States treats their country like a joke. The timeline of the collapse is brutally clear. In early 2025, Canadian tourism to Florida was actually up compared to the previous year. Bookings were strong, the season looked promising. Then in February, Trump escalated tariffs and intensified his annexation rhetoric. By April, 2 months after trade tensions exploded, the number of Canadians visiting South Florida's beaches started plummeting. By May, Canadian visitors had dropped 13%. By July, some hotels were reporting declines as high as 32%. Visit Lauderdale, the city's tourism bureau, typically tracks 1.1 million Canadian visitors annually. That's not a small market segment. That's a foundational pillar of the entire regional economy. Hotels, restaurants, rental car companies, tour operators, retail businesses all built their business models around predictable Canadian demand, and that demand just evaporated in a matter of months. But the real estate exodus tells an even more disturbing story about the long-term damage being done. When Canadians sell vacation properties, they're not just canceling a trip. They're severing permanent economic ties. They're removing themselves from property tax rolls. They're ending relationships with property management companies, maintenance contractors, landscaping services, and all the ancillary businesses that depend on absentee owners. According to Florida realtors, the top Canadian buying corridor stretches from Miami to West Palm Beach, exactly the areas now experiencing the sharpest drop in Canadian property ownership. Real estate analysts warn the trend is accelerating, not stabilizing. The season is just starting, so I think that trend is going to continue, one industry insider told local media. And here's the part that should terrify Florida's political leadership. These aren't temporary economic losses that will reverse when Trump leaves office or when trade deals get renegotiated. These are permanent market exits. Once Canadians sell their Florida properties and redirect their tourism dollars to the Caribbean, Mexico, or Europe, they're not coming back just because political conditions improve. The impact extends far beyond individual hotels or real estate transactions. Florida's entire tourism infrastructure has been built around a fundamental assumption that Canadians will always come south for the winter. They're called snowbirds for a reason. For generations, it's been as predictable as the changing seasons. Cold weather hits Ontario and Quebec, and hundreds of thousands of Canadians migrate to Florida's warmth for weeks or months at a time. But 2025 shattered that pattern. A recent snowbirdadvisor.ca survey found that 70% of Canadians who traditionally spend winters in the United States will still make the trip this year. On the surface, that might sound reassuring, but it represents a catastrophic shift from 82% the previous year. That 12-point drop translates to tens of thousands of fewer Canadian households spending extended periods in Florida. And 23% of traditional snowbirds, almost double last year's number, said they're finding alternative destinations outside the United States entirely. Think about what happens when that pattern breaks permanently. These aren't tourists booking 3-day weekend trips. Snowbirds rent condos for 3 to 6 months. They lease cars for the entire season. They become regulars at local restaurants, gyms, golf courses, and retail shops. They get haircuts, see doctors, join clubs, and integrate into community life. The economic multiplier effect of their presence extends through every layer of Florida's service economy. And now entire sectors are watching that foundation crumble. Visit Lauderdale data shows the collapse happened with stunning speed. April 2025 marked the inflection point, exactly when Trump's tariff threats and annexation rhetoric reached peak intensity. Canadian visitors didn't gradually decline. They fell off a cliff. 1 month tourism was stable. The next month, it was in freefall. Milton Segarra, president and CEO of Discover the Palm Beaches, confirmed that Palm Beach County experienced an identical pattern. What makes the data particularly alarming is the consistency across different Florida regions. This isn't isolated to one city or one county. It's a coordinated withdrawal happening simultaneously from Miami to Fort Lauderdale to Palm Beach to Fort Myers. Canadians across every demographic and income level are making the same decision. The human cost shows up in the testimonies of business owners now facing existential threats. Richard Clavette, who operates Richard's Motel in Hollywood, Florida, described 2025 as a disaster unlike anything he's experienced in decades. People are canceling reservations left and right, he told reporters. They're not booking. We should be super busy right now, and we're just basically seeking American business. That last phrase, seeking American business, reveals the desperation. Florida tourism operators who built entire business models around reliable Canadian demand are now scrambling to replace that revenue with domestic travelers who don't stay as long, don't spend as much, and don't return as consistently. It's not a sustainable substitution, and business owners know it. The broader national picture is even more devastating. According to Tourism Economics, Canadian travel to the United States dropped just over 25% in early 2025 compared to the previous year. That's not a marginal decline. That's a quarter of all Canadian tourism to America simply disappearing within months of Trump's escalation. The U.S. Travel Association projects international tourism spending will decline by $5.7 billion in 2025 compared to the previous year, and they attribute the loss almost entirely to the collapse in Canadian visitors. In 2024, Canadian tourists contributed $20.5 billion to the U.S. economy and supported 140,000 American jobs. Those jobs aren't abstract statistics. They're hotel housekeepers in Fort Lauderdale, restaurant servers in Palm Beach, tour guides in the Keys, retail workers in outlet malls, real people whose livelihoods depend on Canadian spending that's now evaporating. A congressional report released in December 2025 documented the damage state by state. From January to October, the number of passenger vehicles crossing the U.S.-Canada border dropped 20% year over year. Some states saw declines as high as 27%. The report's conclusion was blunt. Businesses throughout the region are also reporting fewer tourists, more vacancies, and lower sales. What makes Florida's situation uniquely precarious is how dependent the state has become on a single international market. Nearly 3.3 million Canadians traveled to Florida in 2024. They weren't spread evenly throughout the year. They concentrated during winter months, filling hotels and rental properties precisely when domestic tourism traditionally slows. That seasonal pattern allowed Florida businesses to maintain year-round operations and employment. Without Canadian snowbirds, the winter shoulder season becomes economically unviable for thousands of businesses. And the political response from Florida's leadership? Governor Ron DeSantis mocked the entire crisis, posting tourism statistics on social media claiming record numbers while conveniently ignoring the Canadian collapse. Yes, overall Florida tourism showed marginal growth in certain quarters when you combine all visitor categories. But that aggregate number obscures a fundamental restructuring. Brazilian tourists increased. European visitors rose slightly. But those gains don't offset the loss of Canadians who stay longer, spend more per capita, and return consistently year after year. DeSantis even took a shot at Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who had publicly stated he wouldn't visit Florida this winter for the first time in his life. The governor's dismissive tone revealed a dangerous disconnect from economic reality. When a major political leader from your largest international tourist market announces he's personally boycotting your state, that's not a political spat to mock on social media. That's a warning signal that the relationship has fundamentally broken. But Trump and his allies don't seem to grasp the permanence of the damage they're inflicting. They treat consumer boycotts like negotiating tactics that can be reversed with a press conference or a trade deal. That's not how markets work. That's not how human psychology works. Once consumers internalize that they're unwelcome, once they've made the emotional decision to redirect their travel and investment dollars elsewhere, they don't simply reverse course because politicians declare the crisis over. Canadians aren't staying away from Florida because of tariff percentages or trade policy details. They're staying away because the President of the United States publicly suggested their country should surrender its sovereignty and become an American state. They're staying away because that same president imposed economic sanctions on their economy while treating the relationship like a hostile negotiation rather than a partnership between allies. When a Canadian family sells their Fort Lauderdale condo after 20 years of ownership, they're not making a temporary political statement. They're making a permanent life decision. They're telling their children and grandchildren that this chapter is over. They're finding new vacation destinations, building new traditions, creating new memories in places where they feel genuinely welcome instead of tolerated. And while they're redirecting those tourism dollars, the data shows exactly where the money is going. Canadian international travel is actually up overall in 2025. They're spending $20 billion on travel within Canada and $8.1 billion abroad, up 28.4% year over year. They didn't stop traveling. They stopped traveling to the United States. They're going to the Caribbean. They're booking European vacations. They're exploring Central and South America. They're discovering they can find warm weather and beautiful beaches without dealing with a president who insults them. The tragedy of this entire crisis is how completely avoidable it was. Florida didn't have to lose billions in tourism revenue and thousands of jobs. Real estate markets didn't have to crater. Canadian property owners didn't have to sell homes they loved. None of this was inevitable. It happened because political theater was prioritized over economic reality. Because Trump thought he could bully America's closest ally without consequences. Because he fundamentally misunderstood that consumer behavior cannot be controlled through threats or ultimatums. The Canadians who are selling their Florida properties and canceling their winter plans aren't the architects of this crisis. They're responding rationally to being treated with disrespect by the most powerful political leader in the country where they used to feel welcome. Florida businesses losing revenue, workers losing jobs, and communities losing economic vitality aren't casualties of Canadian hostility. They're casualties of American arrogance. And once trust is destroyed at this fundamental level, no trade agreement restores it. No diplomatic reset brings back families who've already found new places to build their winter memories. The damage is done, and Florida will be paying the price for years to come.